Morning.
Welcome.
That's up there. I don't know if I'd turn.
All right.
Also, Southwestern Seaboat.
Sorry, David Gould, we're getting a lot of background. I don't know if you're able to mute, that would be helpful. Thanks, and we'll go ahead and get started here in just a minute. Vicky, do you want to try your audio and it's maybe welcome the group and kick us off? Unfortunately,
I'm unmuted.
you're still, we could still hear you, David. We may be able to do it on our end as well. That's helpful for you. Okay, Vicky, do you want to, can you just say something and we'll see if we've got your audio? Unfortunately not. No, we still don't have you.
Yeah. I can hear you.
Oh, yep, we can hear you, David, thanks. I was speaking with Vicky Walker. We were having a little trouble with Director Walker's audio. It's like maybe she's dropped off and is going to try to rejoin. We'll give Vicky just a moment. And if it doesn't have her audio, we'll just go ahead and get started. As a reminder to folks, so we have a designated time at the end of the meeting, so 10 to 15 minutes, right around 10:45, depending on how long other sections of the meeting take, available for public comment. If you wish to make public comment, please send a chat to me or to Jenna, and we'll make sure to keep a queue of those interested in saying something. And with that, Vicky, I see you've joined back in. Let's try that audio one more time. Can't hear you yet, unfortunately.
It's probably just a little bit of lip reading there. I think it's a good thing we couldn't hear her just that second.
So maybe what I'll do is just quickly walk through the agenda, and then we'll just go ahead and get started. And Vicky, if you get that audio working, we'll join you up and give you a few minutes to say something by way of welcome. So, really the lion's share of today's meeting, we'll spend a little time doing intros, and everybody largely knows each other, so I'm not sure we need to do a full set of introductions, but we're going to spend the excuse me, the lion's share of the meeting focused on the legislative concept. So there was a small group of folks that agreed to work on draft language. That's Mark Stern, Keith Timchuk, Bob Salinger, Melissa Cribbins, and Paul Beck. So those folks have met a number of times and have some sections. So the framework for the legislative concept we're going to walk through. Jeff will do that. There are some sections that the language is largely agreed to by the work group, and we want to run those by you all for feedback, get any initial reactions to that, as well as suggestions you might have on the elements that are still under development. And ultimately, those will be shared with you via email, and we have another set of advisory committee meetings coming up as well. But we'll look to you all to provide written feedback on the legislative concept. Because we have all of you together, we also wanted to take, half hour, 20 minutes to update you on some of the other work elements. So this is going to be high level overviews of public engagement opportunities coming up from Ali and Michael, as well as Troy and Melissa on the Habitat Conservation Plan, and then from the OSU team on the FMP process. Again, we'll have a few minutes reserved at the end for public comment, and then we'll wrap up and get you out of here no later than 11 a.m. So any questions about the agenda? All right. With that, we will go ahead and get started. Jeff, if I share my screen, would you be willing to walk through the key elements, sort of the high level overview of the legislative concept?
I would be happy to do that.
Great, thanks. All right, hold on. I've got the agenda up and I need to move this. All right, can folks see that?
Can't see very much of it, but it's clear on the screen.
Okay.
So I think as Peter and I talked a little bit, I thought maybe the first thing I'll do is just real quickly go through each of the headers so you see the full scope of what's on the table that's being worked on, and then we'll go back and take it section by section and just talk for a few minutes. And maybe Peter, at that, when we go back the second time, we can stop and have the members of the working group talk about their reflections on that particular section, either what's there or what's underway. Does that make sense?
That sounds great. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay. So again, we're not drafting legislation in this process. We're drafting instructions to legislative counsel, who will draft the actual bill language, which is an important thing for, I think, everybody to remember, is that while some of this language might end up intact, much of it won't, as they plug it into the format for a bill to be introduced. But we do know that there are particular sections that need to be addressed in the legislation, and there's a purpose, the reason to actually establish an Elliott State Research Forest. That's what ESRF means at this point. There's the purpose for establishing the forest and the authority that the legislature will grant to do it. There'll be a mission that will be an overarching mission statement, and then some articulation of particular elements of the mission in a little bit more detail. The third section will talk about what kind of authorities the entity has to be given by the legislature in order to implement its mission. And then the key pieces that really have been the meat of our conversation so far have been around the roles and responsibilities of three key players in the Elliott State Research Forest going forward. The executive director, then I think if you scroll up, the board of directors, and then the state land board will, and we'll talk more when we go back through the second time, but the state land board has a continuing role that's contemplated by the work that's been under discussion for the last several weeks. The next section then is looking at the composition of the board of directors, how they're appointed, the number of them, how the initial board of directors will come about. Then we've got advisory bodies that'll be specifically identified, and public involvement around advisory bodies, public accountability, public records, the application of other state laws that'll be relevant to the operations of the Elliott State Research Forest entity. We are contemplating linking the bill in some manner or fashion to decoupling from the Common School Fund. And then there's some discussion about specific call-outs that might occur in the legislation around the forest itself. So that's the substantive pieces that we contemplate would be in a bill that's drafted by legislative counsel. There will probably be a number of other, I'm going to call them housekeeping, but that sounds too de minimis. They're important, but things that are maybe not policy, but reconciling authorities and other statutes. And Department of Justice, our attorney Matt DeVore is here today, I see. I know he's working with other counsel in the Department of Justice and with OSU legal counsel just to identify other technical things that might need to be addressed in the statute in order to have the clarity that the forest needs to be run in the way we're all talking about running it. So that's the overview. And I don't know if any questions from the advisory committee on that piece of this, or shall we just drop right into talking about each section? Okay. So on the purpose, so this draft, Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, but this draft has pieces that the working group has signed off on generally. And then if there's work still underway and language evolving, then we kind of put a placeholder there. Is that?
Yeah, that's right. I think that largely agreed to. So if you have content, so if you see, for example, in section 1 here, purpose for establishing, that language is largely agreed to. I think it's important for everybody to know there could be some tweak. And as Jeff said, this is not the legislative language. So it isn't exactly what would come out in statute. And obviously you all will have an opportunity to see that prior to it being finalized. But for purposes of guiding the legislation development, this is the sections that have content included are largely agreed to by the work group. The sections that don't, there is content under development in many cases. A fair amount of work has gone into that, but rather than put you through the exercise of looking through a track change with a whole bunch of different edits and suggestions that we're working to clarify, we wanted to provide you a clean section with really these key provisions right now. So.
Cool. All right, that helps. So the section 1, the purpose for establishing the Elliott State Research Forest Authority, the key thing that is in this that has been discussed and resolved is that the research forest will be established as a separate public entity, not rolled into an existing state agency or into OSU. And so it'll be a standalone and I emphasize the word public, public entity with all the authorities that it needs in order to implement the mission as it's articulated in the bill. There've been a lot of discussion about whether it would be in a separate entity or whether that would be a public corporation or a public agency, and we at least at this point still have it as very clearly a public agency / entity that has the authorities to implement the research mission. I don't know if any of the working group members have anything to say about that section before we go on to the next one.
Can you hear me at all? So can you hear me?
We can hear you, David.
Well, I have a concern about this workshop.
We are going to take public comment towards the end, and we'll make sure to get you in the queue at that point. Thanks very much.
So the mission, the second section is the mission section, and that's the one that there's been a lot of work done on this one, and a lot of redlining still happening, I think. There are 2 pieces that are currently under discussion in the mission. One is to have an overarching mission statement, and then the second was to have a clear articulation of the purposes for establishing the forest and why the forest is being established, and so I think it's not a blank slate. There's actually been a good chunk of conversation over the last couple of weeks on this, and it's pretty darn close, I think. Anybody want to add in from the working group on that?
Yeah, I would add that that those details were all gleaned from the work we've done in the last 3 years. It wasn't reinventing the mission of the forest and those things that we wanted to do. It was all the things that came from the whole committee, like I say, over the last 3 years.
That's a really good point, Paul. Thanks. Yeah, the starting point for the work that the working group is doing is, if you go all the way back to 2019, this advisory committee generally signed off on and worked a good chunk of time on some guiding principles language, and all of it, the origin of the mission section in the legislative concept came from those guiding principles and from the OSU proposal, and as it articulated the guiding principles. So there was not anything that was coming out of thin air by the working group. It was the starting point of the advisory committee's work.
Thanks. Thanks, Paul. Mark, did you have something?
Yeah, it's just a question, and maybe it'll come out later when we're back to the purposes and the authority, and it says the ESRF is an independent entity. You know, there is a link to the land board, and you know that plays out further in this document. And I just wonder if there's a placeholder appropriate in that first purpose there.
The link to the land board doesn't mean that it won't be an independent public entity. So we've kind of talked that through with the Department of Justice. So the implication of this, whether it's rolled into as a separate entity in the state structure or not, isn't the link to the land board doesn't impact that. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but we can talk more about that if you want. So going to the authorities to undertake the mission. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I just a housekeeping thing. With regard to the purpose for the ESRF, there is, you know, okay, this is really trivial, but nowhere in the introductory, you know, in the title or in the purpose statement is ESRF written out. And I think it needs to be written out first. The Elliott State Research Forest with Friends for ESRF is established as a public entity. And I say that for two reasons. One, just for clarity. And number two, it emphasizes research, which needs to be front and center in the purpose statement somewhere. It's hidden in the fact that it's an acronym and not the spelled out title. So again, it's super trivial, but that's just, to me, it's concerning that research doesn't feature, and I see it in ESRF, but it's not spelled out. And I would just appreciate that being, you know, included in our edits moving forward.
Yeah, we will do that so that it's clear for legislative council.
Yeah, this is Vicki. Tom, that legislative council would never let us do that and just leave an acronym in there. So it will be defined. And, you know, just for your information, and you can hear me, right? Because I'm on my phone now.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, good. So in the legislative drafting, having been through this for many, many years and many, many bills, the bills don't always come back the way that you ask them to, because drafters have ideas of their own that they think they know what you're thinking. So this will come back to us and we'll have more time to look it over, but I can guarantee you that will be changed right up front.
Thanks, Vicki.
Okay, I'm going to mute myself again.
So the third section, the authorities to undertake the mission. A lot of work has been done on that. What we are anticipating in this section is something along the lines that says, hey, look, with the approval of the board of directors, the Elliott State Research Forest has the authorities necessary to do, and then there's a list being developed of the key authorities that we want to make sure that the statute is clear that the board of directors, with the approval of the board of directors, the forest can go forward and implement its mission. And it's things like entering into contracts and agreements to perform functions related to budgets and human resources, or activities to operate the forest or undertake research, things like that. Oversee land management actions, actions necessary to participate in conservation easements or forest carbon programs and markets or ecosystem services, things like that. And the group's working through those. Permits, compliance with regulatory actions, those are all things that we want to make sure that the legislation articulates, that everybody's anticipating that the entity has the authority in statute to do what it needs to do to accomplish the research vision and the operation of the forest according to the mission that the advisory committee's wanting to have happen. So that's what this section will do. And as I said, this is another one where there's been a lot of work on it. It just has, it's still underway. Roles and responsibilities is the place where we've spent, I think the group has spent the bulk of the time and really sorting through the relationship of the executive director and the board of directors. And then secondarily, what's the land board's relationship to that? I think the first bullet that you see here is has been the place of most of the discussion. The executive director will be hired and employed by and report to the board of directors. But the dean of the College of Forestry will lead the selection process and work with the board of directors on that selection process. And there's a special relationship that's been carved out between the board and the university that will come in the next section. There are a number of other pieces of that language, all of which you can see, but the executive director is pretty much responsible for making the trains run on time and operating the forest and the research programs and communicating with the public and preparing the documents that are necessary for the board of directors to execute their authorities. You'll see that the executive director, there are certain in the 1, 2, 3, 4, I think it's the 5th bullet. The executive director is responsible for preparing and submitting documents that require the approval of the board of directors. And there's a list there of budgets and biennial operation plans, reports on the prior biennium operations, recreation plans, amendments to the forest management plan. FMP is again an acronym that isn't spelled out here, but it's forest management plan. And then any submittals to the federal or state regulatory entities. So the executive director has, I think, most of the authorities and the responsibilities that you would expect to see in an organization with the leader of an organization. Maybe Peter, hold on this section until we go through all three and then talk about the relationship with all of the ED and the board of directors?
Yeah, that works.
Okay. Why don't you scroll down then to the board of directors? Let's go down to that. I'll keep focusing on the relationship between the two. So if you keep in mind what I just said about the executive director, then the board is responsible for the oversight and operation and the fiscal integrity of the entity of the research forest, and as it needs to engage in order to meet its mission. And then what has been discussed at length, and I think where the working group has arrived at an elegant solution, the board will have in statute the authority to contract with OSU, and I think the expectation to contract with OSU for implementing the operations of the forest on a day-to-day basis. And so I think a lot of good work has been done on this section, and I'm going to let the working group members talk about it. But I think you can also see in the other bullets the specific authority of the board of directors or expectation in statute will be that it approve annual budgets, the biennial operation plans, the biennial operation reports, forest management plan, the first version, and then any subsequent revisions that follow. Carbon projects and easements, if there's going to be an ongoing sale, the carbon project credit kind of thing, or easements that might be overlaid on the forest. And there's still more that's being discussed in that realm, but that's clearly part of the board of directors authorities. and the formation of advisory bodies. And that this was another place where there was a lot of discussion by the working group about whether the statute would put in place advisory bodies and working groups, or more just make it explicit that the board has the authority. And so that we left that in, that the board has the discretion to figure out what kind of advisory bodies fit or subcommittees are needed. I think I'm going to stop there, and then I want to talk about the relationship of the board and the state land board and the programmatic review separate. Peter, I think why don't we open up for working group members and OSU. Paul, if you want to talk a little bit about this section as well from your perspective.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jeff. And yeah, a lot of work went into this section to get this relationship right and the intersection with OSU. We want the board of directors to be to have the authority over the forest, but we want that strong tie to research and to OSU as we work through this as well. So we believe our concept with the Dean of Forestry participating in the hiring process, and the close relationship of the executive director to OSU on the forest, the board establishing an agreement with Oregon State for the operation and management of the forest. In our minds, as I look at this, I look at the executive director as more of a up and out, if you will, up to the board to make sure that the board has information with them, working with OSU to get that information up to the board, working with the stakeholders and communication and engagement to the community to make sure that's happening as well. And then that relationship with OSU, which is really more about the day-to-day operations on the forest and building that research mission.
Thanks, Paul. Tom or any other members of the work group want to weigh in? Additional perspective?
No, I think Paul covered it well. I would just say that the research staff and the forest staff would be OSU employees, and thus the need for that close connection between the executive director and OSU, and for chain of command and or line authority, I should say. And so detailing that out is really important, that relationship.
Thanks. Any questions from the rest of the advisory committee? Does the structure here, I mean, this is a pretty important couple of elements of this. Central to, really the governance structure are these provisions here. Any questions, concerns, suggestions from the rest of the advisory committee? All right.
Okay. So if you would scroll down, board of directors, so we can see that last big bullet just before the state land board. Yeah. So the last bullet with three or four sub bullets to it is an important one. There was a lot of discussion by the working group and with DSL around the relationship, a continuing relationship of the land board in some framework over time. And where we landed was to have the board have in statute a responsibility to submit a biennial, we're calling it a biennial programmatic review. And it basically is every 2 years, a programmatic review will be submitted in writing to the land board, and the land board will make that an agenda item at one of its public meetings. And it's essentially an annual operations and a performance report of the Elliott State Research Forest to the state land board. And you can see in the sub bullets the things that programmatic review will address. And it'll talk about the mission related functions and the status of forest operations and the finances and the research initiatives, tribal partners, and the ties to some of the local governments and local economies, so that there's an overarching reporting structure up to a public land board meeting, and the land board will receive that report. And we'll talk in a minute about the land board's role in that. But that programmatic review is really supposed to be, or intended to be, a statutory requirement for a full and complete reporting out in a public venue to elected officials about what the status is and the directions and the trajectory of the Elliott State Research Forest in relationship to its mission. If you scroll down then to the section that addresses the land board and what we're contemplating in the legislative concept, the land board's responsibility is to receive that report and provide input and policy guidance to the board on how they're doing and what they see in relationship from that report in relationship to the land board's understanding of the research forest mission. In the context of the mission in the statute, the OSU proposal that was adopted by the land board or accepted by the land board in December 2020, and then other policies of the state. So you notice that it is the land board's role to provide input and policy guidance. It's not a decision-making role of the land board in the operations of the forest. That stays with the board of directors. But there's this tie, and I think that what we're trying to anticipate in the legislative concept is the connection back to our elected officials around how the forest is doing, and an opportunity for that to occur in a public venue with a good thorough airing of how things are going, with input coming back to the board of directors, but with the decision-making authority around the forest operations and the continuing operations of the forest going forward, sitting with the board of directors, working with OSU. When you scroll down just a little bit further, Peter. So the only place in the current legislative concept that the land board would have a review and approval role is if there is the approval of the first forest management plan that's currently under development, and then any revisions to that plan that might happen, or amendments or updates. And that's a specific role that we are contemplating in the statute. Secondly, if there are proposed revisions or amendments to the habitat conservation plan, once it has been approved by the federal regulatory agencies. And the third is if there's any kind of expansion or reduction or land swaps related to the forest boundaries itself, there would be land board involvement in that. So I think that is the place where there actually is kind of an approval function for the land board that's contemplated in this legislative concept. And then you'll see the third bullet here is if there's if at the request of the board of directors or OSU, or the land board self-initiates it, to provide issue-specific mission-related guidance to the board. And you could call this the high-centered provision. If OSU or the board of directors are really worrying about something and would like to engage the land board affirmatively and go to them about a specific issue, the statute contemplates that will be there, and it will be to seek guidance on what the land board thinks of a particular issue in relationship to the mission that's been established for the forest. Working group members, Paul, any additions, subtractions, corrections?
I have one minor correction or not correction, point of clarification. Jeff or Peter, can you just scroll up a tiny bit to where it describes the biennial report? The programmatic, there's the programmatic review, biennial programmatic review, and then we agreed that there would also be an annual report that would be sort of an operations and performance report. So there's the programmatic review, which is a detailed whole systems review, and then there's the annual update of what activities have gone on in the forest, what are the any annual reporting out of new or explicit research activities or management related activities. And the 2-year biennial report or programmatic review fits really well with the fact that we had agreed to preparing 2-year operational plans for the forest. So we have the biennial review helping inform the board on activities and helping them evaluate then the 2-year operational plans that are coming forward with that 2-year biennial report in hand. I don't know if that helps, but just wanted to emphasize that those are 2 separate things. The annual operations report is separate from the biennial report.
I think it's really important to point out that the land board's settling of things that when we're high centered is, as you put it, that it's related strictly to the mission, that they're not going to throw other things into the mix and reach down and give us direction on issue specific stuff. But it is as related to our mission, our HCP, our forest management plan. If there happens to be a disagreement between OSU and the board of directors, then they would be the arbiter of that disagreement.
Thanks, Paul. Bob Van Dyke.
Thanks, Peter. First, apologies to my fellow board members for some absences I've had. I'm sorry about that. Thank you to the folks that have been working on this. This looks like a good structure, and I sort of like the balance between authorities that's suggested here. I guess one thing I would note is on the state land board, this seems like a good role for the land board. I'd appreciate some note here that that there'll be a chance for public comment somewhere along the way, and it might be at when they receive the biennial programmatic review. These aren't action items, so I don't see the land board actually being required to have a hearing or something, but some gesture that, once a year or once every 2 years that when something does come to the land board, that there's a moment there for the public to weigh in. Obviously, anybody can send the land board anything they want at any time, but I'm thinking more in the context of one of their meetings. So anyway, just a suggestion there, and I'm not sure that this sort of thing can actually make the land board do something like that. But I guess just a gesture about a moment for public connection there might be helpful. Thank you.
Hey, Bob, this is Vicki. Excuse me. I would say that my understanding of this concept is like it would be the land board receives reports all year long. We have them allocated in our programs. And I would, if this all comes to fruition as it looks to be, I would put this on a rotation, that this report would come before the land board. And while it wouldn't be an action item, it would be an informational item unless there is action to be taken. And Matt DeVore's on the phone, I see, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's mostly an informational item, and the public is always allowed to comment at land board meetings. So I think there would be space for that if people wanted to comment on the reports.
Great, thank you, Vicki.
Sure.
Other questions, comments from the advisory committee or clarifications from the work group members?
I had a question about, or maybe it's a concern, and maybe it should be saved for later, but Vicki made the comment, and it's something I've been really worried about. She says bills don't always come back looking the same, and that is my number one concern. Is everybody on this Zoom meeting is giving up 3 years of their life, and not a small part of 3 years of their life, to create this good thing and we've sweated the details and worked out compromises, some of which I don't like, some of which Bob don't like, some of which Bob Van Dyke doesn't like, but they are compromises. And my biggest fear is when it goes to legislation that they will absolutely screw it up, change everything, or change enough of it to where it just doesn't look like what we created. And right now they're actually, some of the legislators are considering something else, another legislative possibility for the Elliott. And the fact that they're even considering it just absolutely boils my blood. That they would do that to this group of people that have given their heart and souls to this for 3 years, and that they're actually considering it. So what is it we can do to ensure that there's an interface between this committee and the legislators to ensure that it at least looks like something that we created? What can we do?
Vicky?
Unmuted. Okay, great. Thanks, Paul. Those are all good comments, and it's always very scary when you're dealing with the legislature because, you know, having spent 10 years making sausage there myself, you can lose that connection that when it comes in the door, it goes out the door differently, and we can't really stop that. What we can do is when this comes back, and that's why there's timelines here. We need to get it into legislative council so that we can get it back, and then we're going to go through it, you especially as the work group, but all of us are going to go through it line by line to make sure that what we send in as a draft comes back the way we expect it to look. Then we can drop our bill. And, you know, it's part of the legislative process is that the public gets to come in, legislators get to come in and testify, and people might want to change something. You have to accept that. But I can tell you that when I testify next week, and unfortunately I didn't get to share some of my early comments with you because I was having audio problems, but when I testify in front of Representative Marsh's committee next week, I'm going to talk about this 3-year process with this advisory committee, the purpose of why it was established, the tasks that you all have been given, and the fact that I don't appreciate anyone else putting forward legislation that's outside of this collaborative work group process. Now, people have the right to do that, but as a department, I'm not going to support that. We established this advisory committee at the request of the land board, and I am certain the land board would back me up on this, that the legislation we're going to support is what comes out of this advisory committee and is highly recommended. So that's the best we can do, Paul. I just can't make guarantees because there's 90 members and they all have the right to add or subtract things that they don't like. But we can at least go in there with a strong commitment that this is really something that there's things in here you don't like and things other people don't like, but you came to agreement and you came together on it. So that speaks volumes to me. And that's what I will convey next week in the hearing.
I would hope that
I can offer you.
I would hope that it would go beyond that, and the 3 highest elected officials that comprise the land board would provide the leadership to the legislature.
Well, I'll be having that conversation with the land board members during my briefings. I am pretty confident from my conversations thus far that they're supportive of our process, they're supportive of our results, and I think we're in a really good spot. I have super confidence in everything we've done here. And I say we collectively, and really it's been mostly driven by you all, which I appreciate more than you know, because I didn't have the bandwidth to do it on my own, nor should this be done on a solo basis. This is a collaborative. I can't state it enough. It's collaborative. And then you just have to trust in the process. It will happen. Good things happen. They really do. I know. I passed a lot of good legislation. So, you know, you just got to have the right people at the table, which we have had for the last 3 years. And I'm looking at all of you on the screen. You're the right people at the table. You're the people that volunteered. You're the people that we asked to serve. And you're the people who are the closest to your constituency that we had hoped for. So, Paul, I just need you to have faith.
So
it will work out.
So let me I know Keith has to leave in just a minute, and I wondered, Keith, if you have anything you wanted to share before you go. Then Bob, I see your hand up, and we'll come to you.
No, but I really appreciate Paul bringing that point up, and Vicki, I appreciate your answer there as well, and your support. So thanks. This has been a long process and truly a labor of love in that degree to get this governance structure done right. And one of the things I will clearly point out is that there's a carryover from the group at large to the small group in terms of the legislative action, in the sense that we've learned to trust one another. And that's probably the most critical element in our success here. And I really want to emphasize that. I have to go. Please add, for the rest of you, I've got to go teach 8th graders about the French and Indian War. Oh joy. So for the rest of you, if you have, please ask questions. I actually just told Peter I'm surprised that there haven't been more questions about the structure we've established, but we have, sometimes we split hairs on particular individual words, and sometimes we've looked at entire sections and went, that's great. And I think what you're finding is that those of us who are working on the legislative proposal and the governance we take this pretty seriously. We meet a lot, and we're going to get something good out of it too, something really good. And then I will go with that. So thanks to all, and I apologize for taking off. So see you later. Bye.
Thanks, Keith. Bob Salinger.
I was just going to say that, I've never been through a legislative council process where they didn't come back and change it and screw up the legislation to some degree. So I think that can be anticipated. It's tough work to translate this kind of stuff into legislative language. So it's inherent in the process. I think the key thing is that we really do leave process and our time and make space and get things on the calendar so that we can come back and clean things up. And usually we wind up going through multiple iterations with Leg Council on complicated legislation. So we need to be prepared for that and make space for it and, just work through that process. And typically, I don't think they try to be an obstacle to getting things right. I think it's just that back and forth that takes time. But we'll be in a little bit of a squeeze sheet again, just because it is a short session. So we don't have that much time to recover from errors and omissions. So I think we got to be really diligent about having that time set aside and being able to turn on a dime pretty quickly to fix things, get it back to them, review, and so on and so forth. I think the more we go into the session unified and say that, what we've been saying, that we've all made sacrifices here to try and get to something that works. And it's delicately balanced, and to the degree it becomes unbalanced, it also may implode, is important for them to hear. And I think we'll give them some pause. I think the fact that it's taken years and years and years, not just this process, but years and years and years of conflict to get to a potential resolution ought to give them pause. And we need to make that point as well. And if it does blow up, what do they want to do next? Because it doesn't solve a lot of the issues that are in front of us immediately. So I think we have some good leverage to keep it on track. I think the biggest thing is going to be time to review, repair whatever changes are made, and get it right when it does actually appear in the legislature.
Any other comments or questions from the group, the advisory committee? Malia, I don't know if you're on. She had other commitments that she's juggling this morning as well, I know, but I wondered, Vicky, you brought up Monday, and I wondered if we didn't want to just take just a brief moment and make people aware of what was happening on Monday.
Sure. Yeah, we've been asked to testify. I believe it's on Monday. I'm in Alexandria, Virginia. I've been out here for a month, visiting with my grandchildren and the one remaining bird out of all of the 7 rescue birds they've had over the years. But anyway, I'm coming back this weekend, and I believe we are testifying on Monday in Representative Pam Marsh's committee, the House Interim Committee on Environment and Natural Resources. And I have to tell you, staff has been really good at working with Representative Marsh's committee to expand the folks that were testifying. It was kind of limited. It was just me and Tom and Jason Miner and someone from the Pacific Forest Trust out of California. I wanted someone from the advisory committee to testify. I thought it was very important to be Oregon-centric and to be centric about the work that we've been doing. I understand, Bob Salinger, you've been added now to the agenda. So that'll be good. And then what I would like is for any of the advisory committees that are able, committee members who are able to be on the video and watching the hearing, so that if there is any question that comes up where I can defer to an advisory committee member, I'll do that. I'll seek permission from the chair to do that. So if you can be in the gallery watching, that would be great. I don't know what the time is of the hearing because I'm still on East Coast time, but we'll get that information out to you.
I believe it's 11 a.m., Vicky, and we will get
11 a.m. your time. 11 a.m. your time. Okay, yeah, I've been hesitant to put things in my calendar because then when I get back, it's all in East Coast time, and then I get completely confused. So I think it's really important for the committee, the interim committee, to hear from us and to know what we're doing. And I will be clearly making a statement that we have not been sitting on our hands or letting moss grow on our feet. We're Oregonians after all, but and moss does grow, but this committee has not done that. And we are very close to having our Ledge Council draft prepared to drop to Ledge Council. So that's sort of my message about that. And, you know, I also want to take a minute to celebrate some of the things that you all have been doing while I've been back here. Early October, I think October 8th is my recollection. ICF filed our draft habitat conservation plan. That was a milestone, and I want to thank the committee and Troy Ramig, who is unfortunately going on to other pastures. I love it when people advance their career and you know, seek new horizons, but in other ways it's a bummer because Troy is leaving ICF, but I can tell you that I have so much confidence in ICF that I'm not worried about it. It's just that I'm going to miss Troy because he's been very good to work with. But I do also want to tell you that the conversations will continue about the legislative issues, and we are definitely going to keep you informed about that. And you know, your communities are counting on you. I mentioned that. That's why you were chosen. And we need you to continue to share what you're hearing. Your voices are essential. You know, we couldn't have gotten this far without you, and we're not going to leave you behind in the dust. So as we start down the journey of the legislative process, it's full of trepidation, Paul. There are lots of bumps in the road. It's not, oh, you can go in thinking everything should be smooth, and then you're shocked to all get out that somebody raised an issue that shouldn't have been an issue, or that you all put to bed, and suddenly someone says, no, we've got to solve this now. So we're going to be watching it very closely. I'm an experienced former legislator, so I know my way around, as does my staff, as do many of you. I know Bob Salinger is no stranger to the legislative process, nor Bob Van Dyke, nor Mary, nor any of you. So we're going to get through it, and we're going to get through it united, holding our hands, and we're still going to sit out on Bob Van Dyke's deck and have beer when this is all over. And I'm not afraid to say that on the record. So stay tuned for the legislative hearing. It will be the first of many. And believe me that all three members of the land board have been very involved in understanding where this process is going, and what has been undertaken thus far. It's my job as the director of the department to keep them informed. And if I sometimes do that at a meeting, if it's on the agenda. Other times I might have conversations individually with their land board assistants, who are also super involved. That's my main communication to the land board members, is through their assistants, and they're fine people and they just do a great job. So I'm excited about this next step. It was a big milestone to decide to go with a public entity, and you all were getting hung up on some things prior to that. And look at what happened today. I read through this document. I've gone through this document several times, as have you, and you have solved many of those issues that were hanging you up for months. So this is all good. I'm very happy.
Thanks, Vicki.
So thank you.
Jeff, and then we'll see if there are other comments or questions related to the elements we've walked through. We'll finish the remainder of the draft legislative concept document and then turn our attention to the other topics. So go ahead, Jeff.
Just a quick note about Monday's hearing. It is not a hearing about this legislative concept. It's an informational session to introduce a good chunk of the House committee to what's been happening on the Elliott. And that's the purpose of our testimony, is to brief them on this process and the transition, or the intended transition to a research forest, et cetera, not to talk about the legislative concept, other than we're working on one and fully expect it to represent the work of the advisory committee.
Thanks, Jeff. Eric.
Thanks, Peter. My question on the legislative concept kind of goes back to fiscal questions. You know, it doesn't really talk about how this new entity that isn't attached to any other department is funded. So is that going to be part of this, or is that a separate conversation?
Can I?
Paul?
It's going to fund itself. That was the goal from the get-go, was the Elliott would pay for itself through sale of carbon credits, through the sale of forest products. That is the funding mechanism for the Elliott. And the board of directors will have control. They will have fiscal responsibility for this entity.
And I think some of that language is blended into the mission statement, Eric, so that you aren't seeing, but that's been part of the text that's under development in the mission for the forest.
It sure seems that needs to be very, very clear for the public to understand that's the only way this works. It doesn't work. There is nothing else to fund it or defend it from lawsuits, or, all of those things that are possible future actions, that needs to be really clear, I think, so that everybody doesn't think, well, there's tie back to DSL, so they'll pay for it. If we curtail harvest, or if we get caught up in, a big public conversation about how this should be done, somebody will pay for it. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks for raising it. And yeah, I think what it speaks to, Eric, is how this legislative concept ties to the work that you all have done over the last couple of years in developing sort of the principles that we're going to undergird the commitments and the work going forward. So thanks for raising it. Mike Kennedy and then Vicky.
Yeah, so kind of adding on to Eric's question, is there anything anywhere where it talks about a startup fund? Because things won't happen right away. Timber revenue won't start coming in as soon as it's set up. So I'm just wondering, where the money is coming from to get things started, if that's been thought about.
The legislation doesn't, at this point, the legislative concept doesn't address a startup fund specifically. It has been factored into the conversation about when the land board is freeing and decoupling from the common school fund and transferring to this entity, that startup will be accounted for at that point. But the legislation is more about what happens when the entity is up and going. But I think you raise a good point, and I'm going to have to think about it and talk to DOJ a little bit about that. Thanks.
Maybe Paul Odenthal, are you on this same topic?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, why don't we have Paul and then Vicky? Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think we need to have the discussion about whether appropriations or funds fold into this piece of legislation or a different one. There is, if you remember the research proposal and also the briefing we gave, high level on the self-sustainment of the forest over time, there is a startup cost that goes with that to get this established and going, that would be looking to come beyond that, and then self-sustaining down the road. So that is a discussion and some information out there if you refer back to the research proposal.
And on that topic, Paul, I think for both Mike and Eric's question, we do anticipate, I believe, for the December advisory committee meeting, spending a little bit more time going through some of the financial analysis that OSU has done and thinking in greater detail with the committee about sort of the financial components of this. So it's definitely something that is on people's mind, and we want to set aside some really dedicated time to dig into that topic and the analysis that's been done.
Yeah, correct.
Good, thanks. Vicky.
Yeah, I agree with that. This is the overarching design of the research forest legislative concept, which doesn't address the money issue. That issue has not been forgotten. We are still working on our federal partners to see what we can uncover that might be applicable to the Forest Research Project. I did send a letter off to GSA a couple of weeks ago. I know it was while I've been back here. And we're trying to schedule a meeting with them to discuss the possibility of using Shutter Creek, the prison down on the coast, on the south coast, that was shuttered. Shutter Creek was shuttered by the legislature. And so that property has some promising value. And we're going out in December to tour that property to see how we can make it work. It's a rather large property, but I have some ideas about who we could collaborate with to help make it feasible. And so those are ways to keep costs down as well. And the legislature, when the legislature gets involved, there's also other pots of money that might be available. So those, I'm glad that Peter mentioned the December advisory committee will be spending some time discussing that issue.
Let's start calling Sutter Creek what it is. It was built as a Coast Guard facility and was converted to a correctional facility, but it was in no way, shape, or form designed as a prison. So it sounds much more appealing when we call it what it was actually designed for.
Well, thank you, Paul. I agree with you. It was not built. Now, you know, we get a lot of surplus property from the government. I wish they'd stop selling people old World War II boats that sink in our waterways that we have to clean up as a department. But yes, that was not designed as a correctional facility, and it was minimum security anyway. I think it's going to be a great opportunity. And it doesn't quite sit on the line between Coos and Douglas County, but it's pretty darn close. So you can flip a coin, you know, but I think it'll be great. And if you all, as members of the advisory committee, I think an invitation may have gone out to see if there's any of you that wanted to go out. And if I'm speaking out of turn, well, so what? I have the right to do that. But we are going to take a tour in mid-December. So if you're interested, let us know.
We could do an annex and redraw the county line through the middle of it.
All right, Paul, thanks.
Good. All right. Well, with an eye towards the clock, Jeff, any other sections you want to just briefly touch on? And then I'm going to give the committee one last chance to weigh in or provide any context or suggestions related to the legislative concept.
I just want to, I'll just touch on the board of directors composition piece. There's been a lot of work and a lot of discussion around that as well, even though it's a blank space on your copy today. But I think that it's zeroing in on a non-Senate confirmation process, appointment process with a board that is not because of the relationship of letting the board of directors establish advisory boards as needed. The board of directors composition is not on the large side. It's on the smaller side and for voting members. So that's being worked on and worked through. And then we did make the distinction that the initial board of directors, as it says in front of you, would come from a slate of candidates developed by this advisory committee and DSL and OSU, with the land board selecting that initial board. So the legislative concept kind of picks up after that initial board has been in place to accomplish the transition. That's it.
Thanks, Jeff. Bob Salinger.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of things real quick. And sorry, I was on the phone earlier. Some of these go back to the earlier part, but I would just say, you know, I think there's a lot of blank spaces on this page, but I think we are relatively close on a lot of those issues. So I don't want people to go away feeling like there's, you know, there's these huge gaps. I think we're coming to a meeting of the minds on most of these things. The one thing I would flag that I think is important is really figuring out what the entity is going to be, because I think a lot of this detail will derive from that. I think depending on what it is, it adds more or less work to this process. So I think that to me, and I just want to flag this for Jeff, really, I guess is an important piece to get settled right away so that we can kind of know the platform that we're building off of. I worry that the longer that hangs out there, the more we're going to have to kind of fix it later and kind of, so just wanted to flag that.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Bob.
I agree with you, Bob. We need to get it put to rest, and we're working on it. And I don't expect it's going to hang out there much longer.
Thanks. Any other comments from the advisory committee? Including the work group members. All right. Good. So the work group is going to continue to flesh out the elements of the legislative concept. When we have the complete proposed draft, we'll circulate that to the full advisory committee. And once we have a legislative concept, legislative language, that will also be shared with folks to be able to review and provide feedback on. So we'll keep in touch with you on progress, updates, as well as content. As always, if there are other members of the advisory committee that wish to participate, we'd welcome your input. We have the meetings that you are welcome to join, but you can always pick up the phone and call any of us and get your perspectives included and added to the conversation at any point. So that said, we'll transition here, and I think to updates on a couple of the other elements, or a few of the other elements of work related to the forest. Excuse me. I think Allie and Michael are going to talk briefly about public engagement. Then we have Troy and the ICF team joining for the Habitat Conservation Plan. And finally, Shannon will give an update on the FMP, the Forest Management Plan development. As a reminder, I've got 3 people from the public who have said they would like to provide comments. We'll have a couple of minutes for each of you: David, Fergus, and Sue, in that order. If anybody else is interested in providing public comment, please send me or Jenna a chat, and we'll get you in the queue. With that said, Allie and Michael, you're up.
Great. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. I've been getting notices that my internet connection is unstable. So if I freeze, I hope it's in a flattering position. Thanks, Peter, and good morning, everybody. Today, I just want to walk you through the upcoming public engagement opportunities. And also just thank you, everybody, for engaging your communities throughout this process. It's really important for folks to hear from people who have been deeply engaged in a process, particularly people who represent different perspectives on an issue, as you all do. As Vicky said, your trusted voices are essential as the really significant engagement that's involved in the legislative process begins. So that's me sort of casually mentioning that we're going to be looking to you again for help. I will share what's coming up. I think I should be able to share. My screen. Let's see if I can figure out how to do this.
We'll give you permission here, Allie.
Okay. Okay, Jenna's telling me I should be able to do it. There we go. Okay, so much of what's coming up over the next 3 months is really focused on the legislative work. So we've got 3 public information sessions coming up, one the week of November 29th. We're planning to talk with folks about the legislative framework that you've all put together. And then the next one will be the week of December 15th. The focus there is really what Eric was asking about earlier, the financial analysis and modeling. You all will be hearing more about it during your meeting that week as well. And then finally, the last week of January, we'll do another information session with the final legislative concept, so folks can really see how it went from, the framework that they saw back in December to the legislative concept to the final, which will become the bill. Woven all along are email updates for folks on other work streams, upcoming meetings, upcoming info sessions, as a way for folks to stay informed. And then this is just a really big picture overview of the various opportunities related to engagement DSL and OSU have been committed throughout this process to providing opportunities for folks to stay informed. We send out emails, we post information to the website, and also finding ways for folks to get involved, whether that's information sessions or public comment periods or open houses or drop-ins. We really want to make sure we are doing a thorough and layered approach to keeping everybody who's interested in this with us every step of the way. So lots of stuff coming up January, March, lots of stuff to be determined in January, March. The unknowns at this point is NEPA. That's a federal process. There's public comment related to that. We'll be amplifying those opportunities, even if we're not leading those opportunities. And then the other piece, of course, is the forest management plan engagement. And I will hand off to Michael to talk with you a little bit about that.
Thanks, Allie. Yeah, hope everybody is doing well. And, as Allie indicated, the week of December 15th, we'll have kind of a more formal timeline and proposed engagement activities for that December advisory committee meeting. But certainly our intent is to have an approach kind of similar to the start of the Elliott process. And if you remember way back when, we held kind of OSU held numerous engagement sessions and stakeholder meetings where, we invited everyone to come participate in those sessions in communities around the Elliott as well as in Portland. So I think our intent kind of moving forward is to certainly do that again and invite everyone from our and DSL's kind of stakeholder list to attend these sessions and promote with the public. Obviously, input from these sessions will be considered and critical kind of as components as we develop the management plan. So I think one of the things we're envisioning is to have the engagement kind of take place in small group settings with stakeholders and kind of large in-person community meetings. Where we'll be sure to invite the public. And obviously, one of the things that we've learned in the pandemic is how to host these sessions in a hybrid format. So while we're hosting these community sessions, I think we'll have opportunities for others to join in from where they are. One of the key things that came out of the subcommittee on Friday was it's going to be critically important to kind of offer some of these sessions in the community surrounding the Elliott. And I certainly think that we're going to plan on doing that, as well as kind of host some in Portland and other areas of the state as well. So when you see the more formal plan in December, it'll outline kind of the points that we think engagement should take place. So one thing that would be great to hear back from the group is once we kind of submit that, if you have any ideas about when we should hold those sessions and at what key points, that would be very beneficial. And then kind of finally, obviously, to go along with all of this is we'll have a website with kind of the forest management planning page that'll allow us kind of to show what's ongoing, what's happening in the future and what's happened in the past as it relates to the forest management plan, as well as state how people and the public can engage, provide feedback, ask questions, all the things associated with the forest management plan. So thanks.
Thanks, Allie. Thanks, Michael. Any comments or questions from the committee? Suggestions? All right. Thanks, you two. Troy and Melissa, I think. And as a reminder, this is the last time you're going to hear directly from Troy in his current capacity.
Aren't you lucky?
No, a debt of gratitude from all of us for the work that you and your team have put in on this. As Vicky said, I think we're all happy for you, excited for the new opportunities, but also sad to see you go, and immensely appreciative, Troy, of the work you've done on this this effort. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and thanks everybody. Yeah, as Vicky noted, I am moving on to a new job, which takes me away from this work and other projects. I've communicated that to some of you already, and for those who I haven't, sorry to spring it on you in a meeting like this, but it has been it has been great being part of this group and part of this process. And, you know, honestly, you know, everybody says this in various ways every week, but the work that you all are doing is really inspiring. I think it's encouraging to me when I see processes like this that work, and this is clearly one that is working. So thanks for all of your work on that. I was going to give the update first and then do the segue second, but since I'm there, I'll just note with my departure, Melissa Klungel from ICF will be stepping in to be sort of the day-to-day point of contact and project manager for the work. Some of you have interacted with Melissa already on this. She's been involved from the beginning, helping to develop the HCP and you know, work through kind of the hard problems. Done a lot of work on the aquatic strategy and has been involved really in all aspects of the planning process to date. So not a new face, you know, to some of you. She will be a new face to others, but this whole process is definitely in good hands. So I just wanted to point that out, and you'll be hearing from Jeff and Melissa more in future meetings about how things are going. Quick update on the HCP itself. So as you probably remember, we made an administrative draft of the HCP available on the DSL website back in September and got comments from some of you and others, other members of the public, and then integrated updates to the administrative draft HCP in response to those comments into a draft that, as Vicky noted earlier, was submitted to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA Fisheries in early October, as you know, sort of our revised administrative draft submittal for their consideration. And the idea there being that the next phase of this whole process is for the HCP to be reviewed under NEPA. As we've mentioned in the past, the eventual issuance of the federal permit is a federal action, so it requires review under NEPA, and that's why there is this kind of additional step. So they received that and are kind of going through their due diligence to make sure that the you know, the HCP is substantially complete enough, and I kind of think about that as it's stable, not going to change dramatically in a way that would change a future NEPA analysis, and then they can begin that process. I will say that coordination is underway. So there is a subconsultant on board that will be leading the NEPA process on behalf of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will be the lead federal agency. They'll be supported by NOAA Fisheries as a cooperating federal agency. And the coordination on that has begun. There will be more to come at some point in the near future about kind of overall process schedule expectations. It's important to note that this is kind of the place in the overall HCP planning process where it switches over to really a federally led process. So again, the Fish and Wildlife Service will be out in the lead. So the kind of the schedule, the timing, the meetings and so forth that are specifically related to that NEPA process will be led by them. So there will be communications coming out from them and from the NEPA consultant on what that's going to look like sometime in the near future. So you'll have more information at that point in time. I mention that because, you know, you've been hearing a lot from us and from Jeff and OSU on the development of the HCP, and this is kind of where we hand the baton off a little bit. We are still working on the HCP a little bit, so there are certainly some outstanding items that we continue to work on, particularly a few things with Bob Salinger and the other conservation partners around murrelets. So that work is continuing. The HCP can continue to be, you know, modified. I'll just say sort of modified in a way that won't disrupt the NEPA review process. All the way up until the release of the public draft HCP, which will happen, you know, sometime next year in concert with the public draft of the NEPA document. So again, more on that process and how that's all going to work and look in future meetings. But I would just wanted to note that the coordination on that has begun. The Fish and Wildlife Service is taking the reins on that. And I think that's good news for our overall process and how it aligns with everything else that you all are doing. So I think that's where I'll leave it at this point in time. Jeff, I don't know if you had anything else that you wanted to add to that, or if that's a sufficient update.
No, I think that was great, Troy. Thanks.
Any questions or comments from the committee? All right, we'll keep in touch. Again, thanks for everything, Troy and Melissa. We'll look forward to hearing more from you and engaging with you more in upcoming meetings. Welcome.
I'll be watching from the sidelines. Don't worry. See how you all are doing.
Can't get rid of Troy.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. All right, Shannon, do you want to talk a little bit about the FMP process?
Sure, I can give a quick update. I'm just going to pull up a couple of slides. And this is very similar to an update that we presented to the FMP working group on Friday morning with a couple of small updates. So that's a subcommittee of this group, but just wanted to give a brief overview of where we are in the FMP development process and the progress that we're making so far. At the FMP working group meeting on October 15th, we presented 3 main areas for OSU scope of work between October and February 1st. And so those 3 areas are up here on the screen: dedicated database and document repository, monitoring plan development, and forest management plan development. And so today I just wanted to share some updates focusing on that first one, the database document repository system, and then the FMP development. And we'll be digging more into the details and the overall timeline, as has been mentioned at the December 15th advisory committee meeting. So first, looking at the database document repository, the progress that we've made in October and this first part of November. The first bullet point here, establishing a framework for the database and repository dedicated to the ESRF. If you recall, in our proposal, we have been looking at modeling this on the H.J. Andrews database management system and their public-facing interface on their website, not identical to it, but very similar. And so we've had consultations with data management specialists, including those at the OSU Center for Quantitative Life Sciences and for the Northwest Alliance for Computational Science and Engineering, who deal with creating large database management systems. They're looking to the future for technology and what's kind of coming down the pipeline, but also very, I think, steeped in the current technology and the type of systems and backups that we would want to have as we're putting together the database management system, and also the access for public, for researchers and other stakeholders. And so we've been having those conversations, and those are continuing. One major piece of this is hiring and appointing a data specialist. And so out of those conversations, we are engaging Hans Liu, who is with OSU and also the H.J. Andrews. He's been working on their database management system for the past 10 years. And so we're very excited to have Hans working with our team, and he's going to be a big part of this Elliott data management planning team that we're putting together as we continue to consult with other specialists on this. And so Hans, his scope of work is really going to be focusing on database design, software and hardware interface, the web-based interface that would allow access, that scope of work would include developing that database that meets the needs of the Elliott under the research proposal, and is also resilient to any changes in the research in the years and decades to come, as well as changes to technological capabilities, and being nimble, being able to evaluate if there are new technologies coming online in the future, whether those would be a good fit or not to integrate into our system. And so kind of developing a decision-making framework for that.
Working closely with researchers to determine the maintenance and growth needs of the databases will also be a key part of this work, as well as creating disaster plans that will help keep the database server functional in case of any disruptions that might come at it. And so we're continuing to work with the people that we're consulting with, as well as getting Hans connected with the data that we currently have and starting to outline what that database management system will look like. Another main piece of this is focusing on the forest management plan development. So as has been mentioned, we will be presenting for feedback at the December 2021 DSL Advisory Committee meeting, a more detailed timeline, including targeting partial draft of the key sections and when those would be available. So we are currently developing that. We will be sharing that with this committee ahead of the December 15th meeting, and look forward to the discussion and feedback that we get from you all on that timeline. Another piece of this is the FMP engagement plan, which Michael Collins touched on already. As he mentioned, we are in progress on this. We're going to be developing that proposal and submitting that to you all to review ahead of that December 15th meeting as well. And that is also something that we'd like to get your feedback on at that point. Other ongoing efforts, we've met with ODF personnel who have experience on the Elliott, who were able to really provide some key information at this stage as we're developing the plan. And we've also met with other stakeholders, including the Coos Watershed Association, whose work really dovetails with some of the projects that are being planned as part of the research proposal on the Elliott. And so we're working to keep those lines of communication open and identify key parts in our timeline and our proposal development where we would be specifically reaching out to people for feedback on key parts of that. And then the third piece here is identifying several models to simulate processes for the management planning on the Elliott. And we've been speaking with several different researchers. On Friday, we had Dr. Melissa Lukash and Dr. Neil Williams from University of Oregon present to the FMP working group on Landis 2, which is a landscape level model. And as we've continued to look at other models, we've really kind of focused in on Landis 2 as a key piece of the modeling that we would want to do as part of the FMP development and then moving forward with the Elliott. And so we're engaging with Melissa and Neil on those efforts as well. Okay. And then another piece is the request for proposals, or the RFQ for coastal management expertise. And this is something that our team at OSU has also been working on and plan to have an RFQ going out soon. And so what we're looking for here is experience in Western Forest Coast Range management. And so bringing in a consultant or consultants to help bring that perspective to the planning process. And that would include a firm or a consultant who is well-versed in silviculture in the Coast Range, forest management and operations, including ecological forestry practices, as well as intensive forestry practices and restoration. Someone who's familiar with logging systems for steep terrain, as well as various markets for forest products that would help kind of key in some of the details of the forest management plan that we're in the process of developing. We're also looking for expertise in riparian area management, managing forests that contain listed threatened and endangered species, as well as ideally someone who's familiar with local stakeholder groups in the Central Oregon coast. And finally, kind of another key group of characteristics that we're looking for is someone who has experience with monitoring plans and protocols, who has experience writing and communicating that would be sufficient to help in drafting some key sections of the FMP, as well as an awareness of future climate scenarios and potential approaches for forest management that we would be considering as part of this FMP. And so that was a very quick overview. We'll dive more into the details. I know we'll have more time at the December meeting, but just a snapshot of our next steps. We are continuing to work on this database management system with Hans and others, continuing consultations with researchers, stakeholders, and others with relevant expertise. We're meeting with an advisory group actually this afternoon of research forest managers and directors in California, Oregon, and Washington to get some additional input on where we are right now and some key questions that we have for them. And then, as I mentioned, we're working on this RFQ to go out for Coast Range forest management expertise to have someone join the team there. And then for the December 2021 DSL Advisory Committee meeting, we'll have that proposed FMP scope and timeline and the FMP engagement plan. And we'll be sending those documents to you ahead of time to review so that we can have a robust discussion and some feedback. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Shannon. And Bob Van Dyke.
Thanks, Shannon. That was helpful. Can you give us a ballpark idea on timing on this? I mean, I see on your agenda, you'll have more in December on that, but for me, ideally, it would be great to have it done by the end of 2022. There's land board members going off, and the sooner we get that done, the sooner we can start implementing. And in particular, actually, I'm even thinking about timber harvest because we're going to need revenue for this. And the sooner we can move towards something self-sustaining that makes this thing look like it's working, the better. So anyway, I'm eager. It'd be great if we could have a deadline at the end of next year, but I'm curious about your initial thinking there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bob, for that question. So we have, from the beginning, been operating on a 2-year timeline for developing this forest management plan, which in and of itself, with all of the complexities that this research forest has under the research proposal, was a quick timeline. And so that 2-year timeline would put us beyond December 2021, or sorry, December 2022. That would put us into 2023. And so the balance that we're working to strike right now is fully understanding that December 2022 is a key landmark in this whole process, and that there have been multiple years of efforts going into this. I think what we don't want to do is rush the process so much that we don't end up with an FMP that is based on the best information, the current data that we have, as well as the input from all of the different experts and stakeholders. And so what we're working on that we'll be presenting at the December 2021 meeting is that timeline with key sections that we would plan to have more fully completed by that point, with some areas where we might still be continuing to bring in information for the final FMP development. And that's something that that we would also really appreciate the feedback on from this committee. And so I agree with you. I think we're in a spot right now where we're working as quickly as we can, but really want to make sure that we're doing this right. And I think the exciting thing is that we have additional team members coming on board now. We have momentum, and we have new data coming in as well. There's LiDAR that's going to be coming in at the end of this year, as well as plans for additional modeling and data collection. And so I think all of those efforts coming together are really going to put us in a good place for the end of 2022.
Okay, I appreciate that, Shannon. Having been through more than one of these processes, and I'm sure others on here too, and I know you're aware of this too, there's, the perfect and the ideal, and then there's good enough to direct things while there can be more ongoing work. So anyway, I encourage you to think about that shorter timeline. It would be great to wrap it up before there's turnover in the land board and, tie this off so we can move to the next step. But appreciate those comments. I do appreciate too your commitment to getting, the best available science and good expertise, and I know that takes time as well. So thanks, Shannon.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that feedback.
Mark?
Yeah, I just had a tag along question to Bob's comments there and the dialogue there. And I guess question I have is, would additional resources, be helpful or a factor and be able to, accelerate the timeline a little wise? I mean, what in sort of trying to understand what the constraints might be, question being, if additional resources were available, might it be possible, more readily possible from your perspective to, have a more accelerated timeline on that, or if that's been a limitation?
So I can only speak to sort of when I've come onto this project and any limitations I've seen there. I'm not sure if there are others from the team, Katie or Anna, who would want to add to this comment or provide a perspective from prior months. But we right now do have the funds to go out and hire additional people. And so that's what we're working on right now. We are bringing in additional expertise through various committees and subgroups, as well as directly hiring people for their time. We have funds to bring in postdocs and graduate students, as well as engage researchers and faculty members. And Anna and I have both come on full-time recently as well. And so I think that right now, based on the work that OSU has done with DSL to identify the needs to bring this FMP together and the funding that's required to do that, we have all that in place right now.
Thanks, Shannon. So I've got Ken, Paul, and then we're going to have to wrap because I've got to have enough time I have 5 members of the public that would like to make comments, and know that we have FMP work group meeting coming up where we welcome more input, as well as a focus on this during our next advisory committee meeting. So Ken, then Paul.
Thanks, Shannon, for the presentation. I really appreciate it. And I also appreciate the fact that you've got between the plan outline here and the potential for your RFQs, pretty decent looking monitoring plan. I think that's a real key for the public. And I would encourage you when the RFP, RFQ, whichever one of the acronyms, but regardless, that there be a really good engagement process there for the public. And that doesn't necessarily mean a bunch of public meetings specific to monitoring, but at least some key information readily available to the public that really likes to see what it is that we're doing with the forest over time. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Ken. Good suggestion. Paul?
Yeah, I would suggest your RFP for, as I understood it, was a consultant with all of those skill sets. I would suggest that person doesn't exist. That person is, if it is a single person, is going to have prejudice, for lack of a better word, bias. They're going to lean one thing being more important than the other. And I think what you really need to do is go out and seek several. Someone that has marketing experience, someone that has engineering experience, system experience, someone who has carbon experience, and get input from more than one. I just think that would provide a better balance of input to the process.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I really appreciate that comment. And that is something that we've been discussing internally as well, and is going into the development of this RFQ. And it kind of gets back to Mark Stern's comment or question as well about whether we have all the resources that we need to complete this on a very quick timeline. And so that's something that we're just continuing to evaluate. But I appreciate that feedback, and that is something that we're definitely considering, that, finding all of these characteristics in one person that might be a unicorn. And so, looking at teams or other ways that we might be able to bring in that expertise from more than one person.
Great. Thanks for the feedback, everyone, and look forward to more conversation going forward. With that said, we'll save just a minute at the end for any kind of closing thoughts from the advisory committee. In the meantime, we have public comment coming. I have 5 people who have signed up, and we'll take them in the order that they did sign up. As a reminder to the members of the public, I encourage you to focus your comments on the content of today's meeting. And as the committee members have done, committed to each other to speak in a civil and respectful manner, to be tough on issues, not on people, and be respectful of the timelines and other folks that are interested. So we're going to ask that you keep to about 2 minutes per person, starting with David Gould. And then we'll have Fergus, Sue, Peggy, and Barb in that order. So David, are you able to come off mute?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I just wanted to comment about the prison down there. I told Vicki I was approved of that idea, using that for headquarters. And then I've got a group from Southwestern Community College set to come out December 1st. The administration of the college wants to go through the forest and look at it. And I also have North Bend thinking about that. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Appreciate your continued engagement and look forward to coordinating with you on that.
I want to say one other thing. I've had problems in the forest driving with my car, and my family told me they don't want me hauling rock anymore. So let's have to bow out on that. I really don't like that idea, but that's where it's at. Thank you.
Well, you have a long history on the forest and those roads. So it's quite a transition, I imagine, to not be able to do that work any longer. Your legacy remains, though. All right, Fergus.
Thanks, Peter. And thanks to the committee for all your continued hard work. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yep, I think you're
Okay.
good.
In light of the rapidly increasing value of carbon as being discussed in Glasgow today, I contend that the purpose of this land, which was given to the state by the federal government for the benefit of schools, that it would be irresponsible of DSL to move forward without a thorough and accurate evaluation of the value of the carbon in the forest, which OSU has been woefully negligent about performing, because I contend, based on projections, that the highest value of that forest is from carbon. And you will be depriving the school fund of an important source of revenue for the rest of the century by decoupling the forest. I would suggest that, Director Walker, that you get a really good evaluation of the realistic expectations of the value of that carbon before you cut off the school fund from what could be a very important source of revenue, as well as the research accompanying it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Fergus. Sue, Craig. Sue, are you still with us?
Okay, there it is. All right, thank you. And thank you to this committee for working so hard for 3 years. It's incredible. May I ask Shannon Murray, who are you connected with? OSU?
Yes, I work for OSU College of Forestry.
Yes, okay. And frankly, your entire presentation looks to me as if you are only including the Department of Forestry. I'm not seeing the amazing opportunities looked into for this forest that we have that belongs to all of us, not just the forestry department. And that's one of the things I'm concerned about, is a much broader perspective of how this could be managed, because I think we need some new ideas, some new excitement, some other groups working with what could happen, and a lot more imagination, very frankly. When you presented, it looked like the same old that I've seen for years in forest management, and that's not going to work anymore. We absolutely need to look at the carbon offsets to start with. And I don't see that being done as much as I would like to see. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sue. Peggy Lynch.
Thank you. And I appreciate the committee's work. It has been wonderful to watch the growth and changes. I just want to share a couple of things. I'm Peggy Lynch with the League of Women Voters of Oregon. And like you, our members have been actively involved in assuring that this very special Oregon treasure, the Elliott State Forest, is maintained in public hands. And back in 2015, we said that the best transition scenario and the best management strategy decouples the old growth clear cutting from school funding, protects the Elliott's remaining native forests, wild salmon and imperiled wildlife, safeguards the Elliott drinking water, public recreational and educational opportunities, and promotes timber jobs by restoratively thinning the second growth tree farms. This is as a part of a letter in November of 2020, as it was being considered to move this to OSU, we brought up two issues to the State Land Board. One is the governance issue, and that's part of what you've been discussing today. Any governance structure needs to include opportunities for the public to engage as decisions around what will happen within the forest are made, and that there needs to be a clear reversionary clause or other mechanisms to assure agreements with OSU are met. And this was back when OSU was going to take over without this public entity. The second issue we brought up was finance. A major concern we have with the possibility of OSU's management of the forest is how they might be able to afford to manage the forest under the principles without over harvesting. And we continue to have those concerns. So what I heard today was the possibility, and I think I heard it from Director Walker, that the bill will link to a decoupling. So this implies a budget request. Will there be a budget request? And I don't expect an answer today. I'm putting it on the record. Will there be a budget request? And I understand in the last comment from Fergus, there would be a new appraisal if that was the case. We expect that there will be a budget request for the next 2 to 4 years, 11 million to startup and 17 million a year are the numbers that we've seen so far. And so I'm assuming that maybe that will have to happen at the same time, unless the date of when this public entity takes over is in 2023, for instance. I would suggest in the document itself that you reorder the Board of Forestry or the Board of Directors of this new entity above the Executive Director. It just makes sense when you're explaining what you're doing, that you're creating this public entity, it's a Board of Directors, and then the Board of Directors hires the Executive Director. And lastly, I just want to suggest or ask, well, clear that the hiring of the Executive Director is a public process. And lastly, is there any linkage to the proposed private forest accord and changes to the Forest Practices Act that may affect the fiscal issues around OSU in making sure that they can practically create this research forest in a positive manner for all Oregonians? And thanks for all of your work.
Thanks, Peggy. Lots there to chew on. Finally, Barb Shamit. Barb, are you still with us?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello?
Yep.
Hi, Barb Shamit here, sitting on the riverbank. By the way, there's no fish this year. We've gone from several thousand to several hundred to 0, not a 1. Not by my house anyway. Couple things real quick. I'd like to talk about Director Walker mentioned that cutting costs by using Shutter Creek. I think it's a great idea. We just read it this morning in the paper. That's a fabulous idea. The less cost, the better. And she also mentioned something with federal dollars somewhere, which is a wonderful option and opportunity to dig into that. And also for recognizing the 3 years of your work. I'm totally grateful for all of you and all of your work, and hope you also recognize the rest of our work for 15 years trying to save the Elliott in a conservation as opposed to an extraction proposal. And, you know, personally, it's been more like 50 years. But anyway, the South Slough Sanctuary, the South Slough Reserve, is still a very good option for governance to look at their model. I hope you all are looking at that. And my family is actually engaged in working with them on some projects in the nearby area out there. So it's very exciting, many good things going on. And the most important thing for me to find out, though, my question for all of you is, has anyone actually proposed to NOAA federal funding for the old growth stands in the Elliott that are protecting, you know, our waters, our fish that are no more, but they will come back if we allow it, and the habitat and the clean air, the clean water, all of that. There's so many things we've been fighting for so very long, and I do hear nothing but plans to, you know, self-sustaining, working forest, all of that jazz. Well, as you know, if you know what's going on the planet, you know that you can't just keep deforesting and expect not to have catastrophic, you know, climate events. So just so you know, we're working hard and we're with you all the way, and to reach an agreement in an orderly fashion, in a friendly fashion. And please get with NOAA for federal dollars, because that's where the money is, if that's what you need. And just log your, or replant and thin your plantations. You might even want to let them grow back. But don't touch anything over 65. Thank you.
Thanks, Barb.
Yep.
Okay. Any closing remarks from the advisory committee? We've got just a couple of minutes left. Paul.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond. There was a couple of folks that seemed to indicate we hadn't thought about carbon as a possible income stream, and we have gone into carbon in great detail. You know, there were several different options for carbon, possible carbon sales, and one of which was a public protocol, and one of which was the private protocol. And we've opted, it looks like, to go with public, and which means that a great deal of that carbon is not available to market. So I kind of resent the fact that it's implied that we're not looking at carbon. We are looking at every option for income stream to fund this forest.
Thanks, Paul. Bob Van Dyke.
Thanks, Peter. I just want to say briefly, I've been part of a separate process, a private forest accord process to try to revise the Forest Practice Act. Peggy referred to this. We've come to agreement. Bob Salinger was in that too. I just want to note that that won't affect the Elliott. So we've agreed that anybody who's already pursuing an HCP or getting their own HCP is exempted from changes in the private forest accord. So there shouldn't be a tension between Elliott strategies and those that will, should we be successful in passing legislation, those that will be realized in the Forest Practice Act. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate the clarification. It is 11 o'clock. Happy to let you all go on time unless any other final.
Could I just say one quick thing? No. The carbon money that I'm talking about is not in the market. It is with NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. They fund the South Slough Reserve. We can get federal dollars to fund your research project. It's not a,
Barb, yeah, appreciate it. And we've taken note of that. There are ongoing conversations with both U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA related to that HCP that was mentioned earlier. And so appreciate the feedback, suggestions, and know that those conversations are ongoing with the federal agencies. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.